Calends of Sextilis, 200 before our era. The mouth of the Tiber River at the port of Ostia. The air hangs thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from salt, sun-baked mud, and the sharp tang of fish gut. You are standing on the swaying deck of a Roman transport ship, a broad-beamed navis honoraria that has wallowed its way across the Tyrrhenian Sea. The rhythmic creak of the hull and the snap of the single square sail have been the sounds of your world for weeks, but now a new cacophony rises to meet you, the sound of Rome. Among the shackled men on deck stands Hanno, son of Gisco, once a high-ranking quartermaster in the armies of Carthage. His wrists are raw beneath iron manacles, his fine linen tunic replaced with a coarse woolen rag that chafes his skin. His gaze, however, is not that of a broken slave. It is the sharp, analytical stare of an engineer, a logistician, a man who understands that wars are won not by the sword alone, but by the grain sack and the amphora. He watches the shoreline approach, a knot of cold dread and professional curiosity tightening in his gut. He had seen the port of Carthage, a marvel of the world with its circular military harbor and bustling commercial docks. He had believed it to be the apex of maritime power. He was wrong. Ostia is not beautiful. It is brutal. It sprawls, a chaotic and monstrous testament to pure, unadorned utility. Dozens, no, hundreds of vessels choke the estuary. Long, slender warships with bronze rams sit moored beside fat-bellied merchantmen from Egypt and Syria. Smaller coasters and barges, crewed by sinewy men with sun-blackened skin, navigate the crowded waterways with a terrifying precision, their shouts echoing in a dozen different languages. A sharp bark in Latin cuts through the din. "Ad Gressum, move! Marcus Valerius Corvus, a centurion of the 13th Legion, strides down the deck. His bronze helmet is scarred, his face a road map of campaigns from Hispania to the fields of Zama. His authority is absolute, radiating from him like heat from a forge. He doesn't shout to be heard over the noise. The noise seems to quiet for him. With a flick of his vites, the vine staff that is his badge of office, he gestures towards the gangplank. The legionaries, their lorica hamata mail shirts jangling, shove the prisoners forward. Hanno stumbles with the others, his bare feet hitting the hot, splintered wood of the pier. The scale of the operation around him is staggering. Teams of longshoremen, the Sakari, muscles bulging under layers of sweat and dust, unload mountains of grain sacks from a ship that has just arrived from Sicily. They work in a relentless rhythm, a human conveyor belt that disappears into the city. Further down, cranes powered by massive tread wheels lift blocks of marble from another vessel, the stone destined for the temples and villas of the great city that lies upriver. Everything moves. Everything has a purpose. It is organized chaos, a living, breathing machine of supply. As Marcus and his cohort march the Carthaginian prisoners off the docks and onto a wide paved road, Hanno's eyes are drawn past the teeming warehouses and insulae that crowd the waterfront. In the distance, rising against the hazy Italian sky, stand structures unlike any he has ever seen. They are immense, monolithic, built of dark red brick and stone. They are laid out in unnervingly perfect grids, their sheer walls punctuated by rows of small, barred windows. They are not temples, nor are they palaces. They are too vast and too grim to be villas. They resemble fortresses, yet they lack the familiar crenellations and towers of a military citadel. Their function is a mystery, a silent architectural threat that looms over the entire port. He had spent his life calculating the logistics of feeding an army of 50,000. He knew the precise number of wagons, the weight of grain, the spoilage rates, the manpower required to keep Hannibal's war machine moving. It was a colossal, near impossible task that had defined his career. But what he sees here, this is something else entirely. This is logistics on a planetary scale. This is the engine that feeds not just an army, but a monster. The column of prisoners shuffles onward, the dust of the road coating their ankles. The Roman guards are impassive, their pila held at a precise, intimidating angle. Hanno chances a glance at his fellow captives. He sees despair, fear, the vacant stares of men whose world is ended. But in his own mind, the gears are turning. He is no longer just a prisoner of war. He is a professional, witnessing the source of his nation's utter ruin. The legions were terrifying, yes. Scipio was a genius, true. But this sprawling, indefatigable system of supply, this was the true weapon. Centurion Marcus halts the column. He turns, his gaze sweeping over the defeated Carthaginians. He seems to notice Hanno's analytical stare, the intelligence that hasn't yet been extinguished. A flicker of something, not respect, but perhaps acknowledgement, crosses the Roman's hardened face. He lifts his vides and points it directly at the colossal, mysterious brick buildings that dominate the landscape. "You see those?" he grunts, his voice rough as gravel. "That is where you are going. That is your first lesson in understanding Rome." The legionaries prod them forward, their hobnailed caligae grinding on the basalt paving stones of the Via Annonaria, the grain road. The name is brutally, perfectly descriptive. This road is not for triumphal processions or senators' litters. It is a wide artery built for one purpose: to pump the lifeblood of the Republic from the sea into the city. The air grows drier, thick with a fine, flowery dust that coats the back of the throat. The cacophony of the docks fades, replaced by a low industrial hum, the rumble of iron-rimmed wagon wheels, the rhythmic chants of work crews, and the distant grinding sound of millstones. With every step, the structures that Centurion Marcus had pointed out resolve from abstract shapes into architectural titans. Hanno now understands. They are warehouses, horea. But the word itself feels laughably inadequate, like calling a mountain a pile of rocks. The one they approach is a city block unto itself, its brick walls rising 4 stories high, sheer and intimidating. The small, grated windows are set high up, more for ventilation than for light, giving the facade the blind, impassive face of a cyclops. Guards from a cohort of the Vigiles Urbani, the city watch, stand at the massive timber and iron gate, their helmets polished, their spears held with practiced ease. They are not merely watching for thieves. They are guarding a strategic asset as vital as any fortress. A scriba, a clerk with a pinched face and ink-stained fingers, stands beside the gatekeeper, a stack of wax tabulae in his hands. He barely glances at the prisoners, his attention fixed on the manifest of a train of ox carts laden with amphorae of olive oil from Baetica. Every item is counted, checked, and recorded. This is not mere stockpiling. It is a science. Hanno watches, his mind racing. He mentally calculates the weight, the volume, the cubic footage. In Carthage, their state granaries were a point of pride, capable of holding enough grain to withstand a year's siege. They were hidden, fortified secrets. This is a public declaration of infinite resource. It is a weaponized boast, built of brick and filled with wheat. Centurion Marcus barks an order, and the massive gate groans open. The prisoners are herded inside, and the world outside vanishes. They are plunged into a cool, cavernous twilight. For a moment, Hanno's eyes struggle to adjust. The air is still, heavy with the dry, earthy scent of millions of bushels of grain. It's a smell he knows intimately, the scent of life, of sustenance, of power. But never, not in his most extravagant calculations, had he imagined it on this scale. They are standing in a vast central courtyard, open to the sky, surrounded on all 4 sides by towering arcades. Each arcade leads into a labyrinth of storage chambers, the celli. The sheer, oppressive quantity of food is paralyzing. Sacks of wheat from Sicily and Sardinia are stacked to the ceilings, so high that the workers use long ladders to reach the top. They are stacked with a geometric precision that speaks of military discipline. In other chambers, he can see thousands upon thousands of terracotta amphorae, each sealed and labeled, containing wine from Gaul, oil from Hispania, and garum, the pungent fish sauce from Africa. The floor is raised, supported by short pillars, a clever design to allow air circulation and keep the grain free from damp and vermin. Every detail is ruthlessly functional, perfected over generations of trial and error. The other prisoners just stare, their mouths agape. They see food, an impossible amount of food. But Hanno sees numbers. He sees the invisible machinery. He picks one chamber, estimates its dimensions, the density of the sacks. He multiplies it by the number of chambers he can see, then by the number of floors. The calculation stuns him, a physical blow that leaves him breathless. This one horium, and he can see at least 3 others just like it from the gate, could hold enough grain to feed the entire city of Carthage for a decade. It holds enough to sustain the entire Roman army on every front of its burgeoning empire for a full campaign season. He realizes the horrifying truth. Rome does not fear a bad harvest. It does not fear a siege. It has engineered hunger into submission. While Carthage had to spend its silver to hire mercenaries and beg its allies for supplies, Rome simply commands. It points to a province and a river of grain flows. It is a logistical achievement so far beyond Carthaginian capabilities that it renders the entire contest between them a tragic farce. They had been fighting a legion. They should have been fighting a spreadsheet. "This is the Horea Galba," Centurion Marcus says, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. He walks slowly down the line of prisoners, his gaze lingering on Hanno. "It does not feed our armies. This is for the city, for the people, the cura annoni. Every month the head of every family in Rome can come and collect his dole, bread, for free." He stops in front of Hanno. "Your great Hannibal, he was clever. He won his battles, but he never understood. You cannot starve a city that has conquered the world's harvest. You cannot break the spirit of a people who will never go hungry. The legions are the fist of Rome, Carthaginian. This is its stomach. And as you can see, its appetite is endless." The days that followed blurred into a routine of grueling, monotonous labor. Hanno and the other Carthaginian prisoners became cogs in the very machine that had crushed their civilization. They were assigned to the Saccari, the dockworkers' guilds, but as captives, they were given the most backbreaking and thankless tasks. Their new lives were measured by the weight of a grain sack and the crack of an overseer's whip. They rose before dawn, their sleeping quarters a crowded, foul-smelling room within the Horium complex itself. Their breakfast was a hunk of coarse bread, ironically baked from the very grain they moved, and a cup of watered-down posca. Then they were marched out into the courtyard, where the work of the day began. Hanno's back, accustomed to the posture of a man who pores over maps and ledgers, screamed in protest. His hands, once soft, became calloused, then split and bled, then calloused over again. He worked alongside men from every corner of the known world, Gauls with braided hair and fierce tattoos, Iberians with dark brooding eyes, Greeks who muttered curses against fate in the tongue of Homer. There were also freedmen and poor Roman citizens, men who worked for a daily wage, their faces grim with the knowledge that this was the only work available to them. They were all part of the vast, anonymous workforce that kept the monster fed. Hanno tried to speak with them, to learn. At first he was met with suspicion and hostility. He was the enemy, a relic of a war that had cost many of them brothers and fathers. But Hanno was not like the other prisoners. He did not complain. He did not shirk his duties. He worked with a focused, almost frightening intensity. When he was told to haul a sack, he analyzed the best way to lift it, the most efficient way to balance its weight. When they were tasked with stacking, he instinctively saw the geometric patterns, ensuring the stacks were stable and secure. He learned the rhythm of the work, the groan of the cranes lifting cargo from the holds, the shouts of the tallymen, the creak of the ox carts. He began to understand the flow, the intricate choreography of unloading, cataloging, and storing. His overseer was a man named Lucius, a former legionary who had lost 2 fingers on his left hand to a Celtiberian sword. He was a hard man, quick to anger, and free with his rod. He watched Hanno with a cynical eye, expecting the high-born Carthaginian to break. But Hanno didn't break. He adapted. One afternoon, a hoist mechanism for lifting amphorae jammed. The crew of freedmen stood around, arguing and shouting useless suggestions. Lucius was about to start laying into them with his staff when Hanno stepped forward. "The fulcrum is misaligned," he said, his Latin still accented but clear. "The weight is not distributed evenly. If you shift the primary rope to that lower peg, it will rebalance the load." Lucius glared at him, his hand tightening on his rod. "And what does a Punic dog know of Roman engineering?" "I know leverage," Hanno replied calmly, meeting the overseer's gaze without flinching. "It is the same in any language." Scoffing, but with no better ideas, Lucius barked at the crew to try it. To everyone's surprise, it worked. The mechanism groaned, the ropes went taut, and the crate of amphorae lifted smoothly into the air. Lucius stared at Hanno for a long moment, a strange expression on his face. He said nothing, but from that day on, the rod fell less often on Hanno's back. Hanno began to see the people behind the system. He saw the mensors, the surveyors who meticulously measured each shipment, ensuring the Republic wasn't being cheated. He saw the clerks, the scribae, their lives a constant flurry of wax tablets and papyrus scrolls, tracking every bushel of wheat from the fields of Aegyptus to the bakeries of the Subura. He saw the guildmasters, hard-nosed businessmen who negotiated contracts for transport and labor with the aediles in Rome. He learned that the Cura Annanae was more than just a government program. It was a complex ecosystem of state power, private enterprise, and brute force labor. The state set the quotas and paid the subsidies, but it was the ship owners, the merchants, and the workers' guilds that made it happen. Rome's genius was not in doing everything itself, but in creating a system that compelled and paid thousands of individuals to collectively serve the state's interest. They had weaponized capitalism itself, harnessing the profit motive of countless merchants to achieve an unbreakable supply chain. Carthage had a state-controlled navy and state-managed trade. Rome had 1,000 private captains all racing to get their grain to Ostia first to secure the best price and the government bonus. One system was rigid and brittle. The other was a chaotic, competitive, but terrifyingly resilient hydra. One evening, as Hanno was nursing his aching muscles, Centurion Marcus Valerius Corvus appeared in the courtyard. The workday was over, and the prisoners were lining up for their meager evening meal. Marcus walked straight to Hanno, ignoring the others. "Lucius tells me you have a mind for mechanics," the centurion said, his tone neutral. "He says you think like an architect." Hanno straightened up, his heart pounding. "I was a quartermaster, centurion. My work was similar, on a much smaller scale." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the towering walls of the Horium around them, now dark against the twilight sky. "This place, it is not just brick and grain. It is an idea of what Rome is. Most men, they see the legions and they think that is our power. They see the Senate and think that is our strength. They are wrong. This is the foundation. Everything else is built on top of this." He looked back at Hanno. "Tomorrow, you will not be hauling sacks. You will report to the chief scriba in the administration office. We have a shipment arriving from Alexandria. The manifests are a disaster. Let's see if a Carthaginian logistician can untangle the mess." The administration office was a world away from the dusty courtyards and sweat-soaked labor of the Hurrium. It was a long, narrow chamber on the second floor, its barred windows looking down over the bustling central yard. The air inside was cool and smelled of parchment, beeswax, and drying ink. Instead of the rhythmic thud of grain sacks, the room was filled with the scratching of styluses on wax and the soft rustle of papyrus scrolls being unrolled. 10 clerks, a mix of freedmen and educated slaves, sat at high desks, their heads bent in concentration. This was the nerve center, the brain that directed the muscle of the entire operation. Hanno was brought before the chief clerk, a severe-looking Greek named Demetrius. His face was a mask of disdain as he looked Hanno up and down, taking in the prisoner's rough spun tunic and calloused hands. "The centurion is indulging in some fantasy," Demetrius said in clipped, precise Latin, his Greek accent sharp. "He thinks a barbarian who knows how to stack boxes can comprehend the complexities of the Alexandrian grain manifests." He gestured to a corner of the room where a teetering pile of papyrus scrolls and clay tablets lay in disarray. "This is the cargo of the fleet of Gaius Lutatius, 30 ships. The count from the prefect of Aegyptus does not match the tallies from our port surveyors. The spoilage reports are incomplete, and 3 of the ships were diverted to Puteoli with no authorization. Your task," he said with a smirk, "is to make sense of it. Reconcile the numbers. Produce a final tally for the aedile. You will be given a stylus and wax tablets. Do not waste them." Hanno did not reply. He simply walked to the corner, sat cross-legged on the floor, and picked up the first scroll. The other clerks snickered. For the rest of the day they ignored him, seeing him as a centurion's pet project destined for failure. But Hanno was in his element. The chaos of mismatched numbers and conflicting reports was not a mess to him. It was a puzzle, a language he understood better than any spoken tongue. His mind, starved for intellectual challenge, ignited. He unrolled the first scroll. It was written in Greek, the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean, and detailed the initial loading in Alexandria. He saw the familiar symbols for Artabai and Medimnoi, the Egyptian and Greek units of measure. He worked methodically, with the same focused intensity he had applied to hauling sacks. He first separated the documents by ship. Then, for each ship, he laid out the Alexandrian manifest next to the Ostian surveyor's tally. He began to cross-reference, to convert the foreign measurements into Roman modii. The numbers danced in his head. He wasn't just counting, he was visualizing the journey. He accounted for the standard rate of spoilage on a sea voyage of that length. He factored in the port tax that he knew the dockworkers in Alexandria unofficially levied on every shipment. Slowly, patterns began to emerge from the chaos. One ship's tally was off by a precise, consistent amount. He deduced that the Roman surveyor had been using a faulty measuring basket. Another discrepancy was explained by a note scribbled in the margin of a scroll in Demotic Egyptian script, which the Greek clerks had likely ignored, detailing a transfer of grain at sea to a military vessel heading for Crete. He found the unauthorized diversion to Puteoli was, in fact, ordered by a military tribune to resupply a legion preparing to embark for Macedonia, a fact buried in a separate military dispatch that had been mixed in with the commercial papers. For 3 days, he barely slept. He ate the bread brought to him at his station, his fingers becoming stained with ink. The other clerks stopped smirking and began to watch him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He was not just reconciling numbers. He was reconstructing a story of commerce, of bureaucracy, of military logistics, and of minor corruptions, all written in the universal language of supply. On the 4th morning, he stood up, his joints stiff, and approached Demetrius's desk. He placed a single, neatly inscribed wax tablet before the chief clerk. On it was a summary, a clear, concise table showing the total grain loaded, the accounted for losses, the diverted cargo, and the final verified amount received at Ostia. Beneath the table was a list of 7 specific discrepancies with his calculated explanations for each. Demetrius picked up the tablet, his expression skeptical. He began to read. His eyes widened slightly. He scanned the figures, his lips moving silently. He looked from the tablet to the chaotic pile of scrolls in the corner, then back to the tablet. He stood up, walked over to the pile, and pulled out a specific military dispatch Hanno had referenced. He read it, then looked at Hanno, his disdain replaced by disbelief. "How?" Demetrius asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The note about the transfer at sea. It is written in Egyptian shorthand. How could you possibly read that?" "In Carthage, our trade extends to Egyptus," Hanno replied simply. "A quartermaster must know the languages of his suppliers, both the official and the unofficial." A silence fell over the room. The other clerks had stopped working and were staring. Hanno was no longer just a prisoner. He was a practitioner of their own arcane art, and he was a master. He had not just solved the puzzle, he had demonstrated a holistic understanding of the entire system, from the docks of the Nile to the politics of a Roman legion. Centurion Marcus entered the room at that moment, as if on cue. He looked at the tablet in Demetrius's hand, and then at Hanno. A slow grin spread across his face. "It seems," Marcus said, his voice resonating in the quiet room, "our Carthaginian friend speaks Roman better than most Romans." He turned to Hanno. "Your days of hauling sacks are over. Your new job is to make sure this office runs as efficiently as the warehouses it controls. You are no longer a prisoner. You are an asset."